Bien, buenos días. Hoy vamos a iniciar una media jornada intensa también, como la tarde de ayer, y tendremos el honor de escuchar a 3 personas que vienen de otras universidades extranjeras. En primer lugar, tenemos a Stephen Downes, que nos va a hablar sobre aprendizaje en base al conectivismo. En segundo lugar, tendremos a Ruth Thomas, que nos hablará desde la perspectiva de las familias. Y, en último lugar, tengo que comunicarles que no podrá asistir Nell Noddings por un problema familiar grave. De todas formas, tendremos a una profesora de la Universidad de Ontario que va a sustituirla en cuanto que va a leer su ponencia, porque ella ya la había trabajado y nos la había enviado previamente. Para nosotros ha sido un inconveniente, pero hemos tenido que hacer lo que hemos podido para modificar el programa. Bien, espero que todos los temas que se traten aquí sean de su interés, porque realmente son personas que en su ámbito son muy reconocidas y para nosotros es un honor, un placer que estén compartiendo con nosotros esta media jornada. No me queda nada más que darle la palabra a la profesora Conchita Naval de la Universidad de Navarra, quien va a hacerse cargo de la presentación del ponente.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días. Buen día and good morning to everyone. La verdad es que me parece que es todo un mérito los que hoy estamos aquí. Sábado, 9 de la mañana, lo cual, pues muchas gracias a todos por la presencia y quizá también pedir disculpas por el pequeño retraso que hemos sufrido por motivo ajeno a esta mesa. Tengo el honor de presentar al profesor Stephen Downes. Tenemos entre nosotros a uno de los grandes en el tema que nos ocupa en el día de hoy. Tenemos la suerte de tenerle aquí, en Barcelona. Él, como habrán podido ver en la carpeta informativa, es investigador senior en el Consejo Nacional de Investigación de Canadá, pero fundamentalmente es conocido junto con George Siemens por haber sido uno de los primeros impulsores de los servicios en línea aplicados a la educación. Trabaja muy directamente como promotor de la revista que quizá muchos de los presentes conocerán, OL Daily, y algunos de sus primeros cursos en línea fueron en Manitoba, famosa y muy conocida. Downes introdujo el concepto de e-learning 2.0 y junto con Siemens desarrolló y definió el concepto de conectivismo, del que hoy nos va a hablar aquí. Estará encantado de poder intercambiar con nosotros después todo lo que quienes estamos aquí tengamos interés o queramos o se suscite. Él tiene una amplia experiencia internacional, comentaba ayer que ha estado ya en más de 17 países en estos últimos años, comentando, ampliando, intercambiando estos temas. Por tanto, no me quedaría más que darle las gracias por estar hoy aquí con nosotros y darle la palabra. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. As you know, my name is Stephen Downes, and this talk is titled Connectivist Learning, How New Technologies Are Promoting Autonomy and Responsibility in Education. And it's a pleasure to be here in Barcelona, October 22, 2011. I want to begin by looking at a replacement metaphor. We're all familiar with the metaphor from Mark Prensky and others about digital natives and digital immigrants. And there's been a lot of criticism of that metaphor, there's been a lot of discussion back and forth, and part of the discussion that's come out of that metaphor is this metaphor proposed by David White and Alison Lecornu of visitors and residents. And they propose it as a better metaphor for the understanding of internet and internet technologies. And they say they're not trying to disprove Prensky's thesis per se. There's no mileage in that either way. But what they're trying to do is challenge the underlying metaphor of language and language learning, and to think of knowledge of the internet more along the lines of knowledge of place or knowledge of environment. And I find that to be a very useful metaphor. They talk about dimensions of engagement, the different ways a visitor and a resident will engage with their environment. And a visitor will see the web as nothing more than a collection of tools, like a tool shed, a place they go into, get what they want, and then get out of, but they don't stay, they don't build, they don't create. But a person who is a resident of the web, a resident online, is a person who thinks of it or sees it as a space or a place where they can create their own identity, they create their own artifacts. It's thought of as a work in progress, like their home or their backyard. I like the metaphor, but I'd like to think of the metaphor more widely. Here, for example, is a paper from Marlene Scardamelia and Carl Barrett here. I'm sorry, I'm trying to read print that's about this big, and I need new glasses. Oh yeah, it's a lot bigger there, isn't it? Carl Barrett here. Talking about knowledge as community or knowledge societies. And this is a concept that certainly doesn't originate with them, and they run through in their paper all the memes, the collections, the ideas of knowledge as community, community of practice, community of practitioners, normal science, paradigmic science, and all the rest of it. And the idea here is that, whoops, it doesn't scroll. That knowledge building represents a way of refashioning education in such a way as to think of creating knowledge as inculcating a knowledge of a culture in a people or a knowledge of a place. And so in this context, because they're still talking about knowledge of the internet becomes less like a library containing books and facts and information, and more like a community, a civilization-wide knowledge-building effort. And so the idea here is that knowledge is created by community, community creates knowledge, and if you draw the metaphor full force, knowledge is community, community is knowledge. And that's a good place to start. It's a metaphor. It's not necessarily going to be literal, but it is a good starting point. I tend to think of this on a more general plane, not just as a metaphor for coming to understand the internet and internet technologies, but for coming to understand domains or disciplines of knowledge generally, where the learner, if the person is a learner of chemistry or a learner of physics or a learner of botany or of ancient languages or whatever, is coming into the domain for the first time, it's like they are a visitor to a new community. And over time, as they become more expert, they become more and more like a resident of the community, more familiar with the roads and the byways and the alleys and the stores and the people, more easily able to naturally go from place to place to communicate with the other residents and to behave like an inhabitant. And I've used this analogy on numerous occasions when attempting to explain the type of learning that we are up to in connectivism, the type of learning that most properly characterizes online learning for the 21st century as compared to learning as we've done it in the past. And I talk to people by analogy. I talk to people about visiting a city for the first time, as, you know, say myself in a place like Barcelona, and the different ways of coming to know about a city, the different ways of being a visitor to the city, the different ways of coming to be a resident to the city. In traditional learning, when you arrive at a city, somebody would take you by the hand, put you in the back of the car, and drive you straight to your destination. And that would get you there. It would work. But nobody would be said to have known the city or experienced the city in such a case. By contrast, we can think of coming to know a city through different alternative metaphors, alternative practices. We could, for example, have a map of the city. We could, for example, take advantage of the bus and the metro system. We could, for example, hire a person to show us around, or get on one of those hop-on, hop-off tourist buses. We could, for example, buy a guide from Fodor's or McNally or whoever makes travel guides and get the list of the 10 best places. We could ask friends, have you been to Barcelona? What's the best restaurant? Where should I go eat? Etc. And so we can think of learning in this way as a visitor to a city who has a wide variety of means available to them and does not need to be taken by the hand and shown exactly where they need to go. And this is the model that we use to design courses in connectivism. And we think of what we are creating as analogous to a map. This slide that I'm showing you now is the course diagram from an actual connectivist course. It's a course called Connectivism and Connective Knowledge. We're very recursive, so we teach courses about the theory that we're using to teach courses. And I could keep going because it's recursion. But as you can see, this does not look like a traditional course. It does not look like a book with chapters and a linear structure. It looks like a map. And this map describes the different areas, the different communities, the different neighborhoods of the course, the different modalities, the different subjects. And what's interesting is this is only the course that we, the course designers, created. And when we received visitors, we received about 2,200 visitors to this course, they began to build as well. And the full map of the connectivist course would be many times that size. I've talked about connectivism. Connectivism is a theory about learning. It's a theory of pedagogy. It has its basis in network theory. Computationally, the connectionist theories proposed by people like Rumelhart and McClellan. Mathematically or conceptually, graph theory and network theory as proposed by people like Barabasi and Duncan J. Watts. And it's essentially the theory that knowledge is distributed across a network of connections, whether that network is the network of neurons in the human brain, or whether that network is the network of people in a community interacting with each other. And that learning, therefore, consists of creating these connections between neurons or between people in the network and the ability to traverse those networks or the ability to have dynamic activity within that network. It shares with, I keep getting this wrong. It shares with other theories the core proposition that knowledge is not acquired per se, as though it were a thing, as though it were an object, but rather to come to know is to become something different, to grow new connections in the mind, to shape oneself differently. Where connectivism differs from traditional theories of learning is that it denies that knowledge is propositional. It denies that knowledge is made up of sentences and facts, and rather proposes that knowledge is distributed, that it consists of patterns of cognition. And it denies that the acquisition of knowledge is something intentional, that you go out and you become, you create or you build knowledge, you create or you build meaning. Rather, it says that this is something natural, that human brains and that networks do, appropriately constructed networks do, that the formation of connections in a network is a property of the structure of the network and the nature of the inputs to that network, or in the case of humans, as we would say, the nature of experience. Now, I don't have a whole lot of time for the theory, although I'd certainly entertain any discussion of that because I could go on for hours about it, and have. But I'd like to talk about the practice, and in practice, the instantiation of connectivism is the massive open online course, or the MOOC, which is probably the worst name we could have come up with, but we didn't come up with it. Somebody else did, and it stuck. The MOOC is an open online course created as a network. It connects not only different resources that the course facilitators provide, but it also offers an environment in which the resources created by the participants are also connected. Activity in this course consists of exploring these resources, communicating with each other, and engaging in the discourse of a particular knowledge community. In the case of the first course that we offered, Connectivism and Connective Knowledge, it would be the community of educators who are interested in connectivism. Like I say, I like recursion. But there have been other courses, and I'll talk about those in other subject areas, and the model remains the same even in different areas. And the idea, again, is to engage in the sort of discourse and the sort of practice typical of that domain in this distributed online environment. Our students can be very creative in their representation of the courses that we've provided. These are two diagrams created by students of two different courses. And the first one we refer to in English as Connectivist Duckworks, because it looks like a duck. And the other one is a MOOC. But again, what they're getting at with these diagrams is the dynamic, natural, organic, even unplanned, unshaped nature of these courses. What we are attempting to do in these courses is not to build a structure, but rather to grow a network. And so it's very fluid, very dynamic. As I mentioned, this is a theory based on the idea of learning as network formation, learning as network growth. When we design a connectivist course, we think of the participants as though they are nodes in this network. A teacher is a node in the network. A student is a node in the network. And then the actual practice of teaching and learning in one of these courses is the sending of and receiving of communications with other nodes. We have a formula, ARRF, aggregate, remix, repurpose, feed forward. It's not simply a transfer of signals back and forth, but a bringing together or an intentional selection, collecting of resources, of reorganizing them, remixing them, reshaping them, adding to them, localizing them, translating them, reframing them, and then passing them on to the next node in the network. And through this sequence activity repeated, we emulate or even sometimes become part of the practice of a discipline. And it's in this practice that we grow our own personal networks. It's through this practice that we come to be like a person who already works and is expert in this discipline. Here's the process represented diagrammatically. We are using a social network on the left-hand side in order to create a personal network on the right-hand side. The idea is that our actions in society, interacting with other people, results in the growth of a neural network appropriate to a person who is a member of that community. It's a lot like getting to know a city, personal knowledge, by getting out into the city and walking around or reading maps or experiencing the city. And if you think about it, that's really the only way to get to know a city. Now, I've covered a lot of theory in a very short time. What I want to focus on today are some of the success factors of these networks. What makes a connectivist course good as opposed to bad? It's difficult to say when something is good or something is bad in this sort of environment because it's not traditional learning. I can't just turn around and give you some knowledge and then test you to see if you recall that knowledge, because on this theory, that's not how learning works. On this theory, your learning isn't something that I ever actually gave you. Your learning is something that you developed for yourself. So what are the conditions under which one of these courses is going to be a success? To jump over a few steps here, the conditions under which a course that is structured like a network will be a success are those conditions that describe a successful network, which just begs the question, what is a successful network? A successful network is one that is stable. It is one that continues to be dynamic. It is one that is not static, is not inert. It is a network that can respond to input. It is a network that does not collapse. There are different ways of describing network failure or network death. The most typical of these is a phenomenon known as a cascade failure. And we're familiar with cascade failures in real life. The spread of a disease through a society, for example, is a cascade failure, resulting in network death. The failure of a hydroelectric grid, where one power plant goes out and then another power plant goes out and eventually half of North America suffers a blackout. That is a cascade failure. A distributed denial of service attack, if successful on the internet, would be a cascade failure. A network that is resistant to this kind of failure is a network that allows for signals to propagate, but not right away. There's some delay. There's some mechanism by which the network can respond to and adapt to, and if you will, to speak metaphorically, have different points of view on different input signals. Networks that are resilient in this way resemble mesh networks. Those are the networks to the right. Networks that are not resilient are star networks or hub and spoke networks. The mesh network creates friction in the propagation of signals through the network, and this creation of friction allows for different signals to propagate at the same time and compete against each other rather than a single signal as might happen in that star network, to develop and propagate through the entire network right away. So you may ask, as you should, what are the conditions that lead to the creation of mesh networks rather than star networks? Borrowing from people like James Surowiecki and others, I've identified 4 major factors. It's not definitive. It's, I'm picking things out of the air, subject to empirical testing. But these factors seem to be important. And they are autonomy, diversity, openness, and interactivity. Here are these factors represented in a Spanish language diagram, distinguishing between what I called groups and what I called networks. And I'm told that that was probably a bad choice of terminology. I should probably say on the left side, which is groups, star networks or poor networks or ineffective networks. And on the right-hand side, where I've said networks, I should say maybe successful networks. But again, we have the 4 conditions represented in this diagram: diversity, autonomy, openness, and connectivity. Now, for this talk, for the purposes of this conference, I want to focus on the condition of autonomy. Now, Wikipedia defines autonomy as freedom from external authority, which I think is a pretty superficial definition of autonomy. But I think there's no question that in learning, autonomy plays an important role. I once said on Twitter, autonomy is what distinguishes between personal learning that we do for ourselves and personalized learning, where learning is done for us. But what is autonomy? Well, I'm an educator, I'm a philosopher, I'm not a theorist in autonomy theory. But I want to go beyond the simplistic definitions of autonomy as freedom from constraint. It's like defining freedom as the absence of limitations. A model like that would make a speck of dust floating in interstellar space free and a human non-free, which doesn't make sense. We could look at autonomy rather than being the absence of this or the absence of that, and look at autonomy as something positive, such as, for example, autonomy as a capacity to act, and the factors affecting that capacity to act. And so, again, this is probably not original to me, but it's what I came up with, a 4-factor model of autonomy. And those of you who are experts in the field of autonomy, I have no doubt will recognize many of these elements. And the 4 factors are experience, or the factors affecting epistemic states, factors affecting our capacity to know or come to know or understand. Empowerment, in other words, our capacity to act on those epistemic states. Engagement, which is the scope or range of behavior in the environment in which we find ourselves. And then finally, effect, which is the consequence or result of this behavior. I think all 4 are demonstrably and objectively necessary for autonomy to occur. If your experience is shaped for you, it doesn't matter how free you are, you're acting on poor information. If you know but cannot act, you are not autonomous. If you can act, but only within a very limited constraint, you are not autonomous. And if you can act, but your actions have no effect, you can hardly be said to be autonomous. If we look at each of these 4 factors in autonomy in more detail, we can draw out the elements that inform the design of a connectivist style of course. Let's look at the first set of factors, and these are the factors affecting experience, which can be roughly and conveniently divided into three major categories: empirical, cognitive, and external. The empirical factors are factors affecting our memory and our perceptions, but not simply the sensory experiences, but also one's emotional experiences, fears, phobias, even things like pains, inertia, and even some psychological experiences like traumas, phobias, needs. All of these play into a person's perceptual experience of an environment. There are external factors affecting experience, external factors that will shape the way we see the world. Punishments and rewards are the most obvious of these, especially in a field like education. Rewards could be things like money, recognition, satisfactions. Punishments, I won't even go into that. We can read Foucault and be done with it. There are also other external factors beyond punishments and rewards. We can talk about Maslow's hierarchy. We can talk about expectations, standards, and even things like visions or ideals. And here I would bring in the commentary of people like Nietzsche. And then the third factor affecting experience is the nature of the experiencer. It's widely recognized and held that we see what we expect to see. We see what we are looking for. Perception depends on expectation. And so in the cognitive factors affecting experience, we can talk about inference, abduction, inference to the best explanation, but also a person's worldview, the frames or metaphors that they live by, to quote George Lakoff, their theory or understanding of causality, whether that be physical or spiritual in nature, their sense of ethics and morality. All of these come into play to shape their experience. As well, their capacity to understand and comprehend that experience, which I can categorize loosely under headings like literacy and numeracy, and then their tolerance for or requirement for certainty or uncertainty, whether they will believe something on partial evidence or whether they require full evidence to come to believe that something is the case. Very roughly and loosely in this diagram, from left to right, we can draw a frame or a reference. I'm looking for a word and it's not there. A line. A line, a gradation. There's a word there. Between less autonomy and more autonomy. The factors on the left-hand side, traumas, needs, pains, punishment, rewards, these are factors reflecting environments in which there is less autonomy. A continuum. Thank you. That's what I wanted. That's the word. Then in the middle are factors that are sort of imposed on us, but in which there may be some scope for autonomy. And then on the right-hand side, worldviews, moralities, literacy are factors reflecting greater autonomy. Now, this is a rough and loose continuum. And of course, we would want to identify much more clearly how much autonomy and the range of autonomy for each one of these factors. But that's not going to be done in a 45-minute talk. But we can still track that to the design of a connectivist course or a connectivist environment. One principle would be this: minimize the factors limiting autonomy, such as pain, fear, punishments, and rewards. A connectivist course removes those as elements of the course. Our courses, the courses that we've offered, do not have tests and grades, do not have competitions between members of the course, do not have passing or failure. Another aspect of connectivism and experience This is now with respect to the factors that are in the middle, whether there was scope or range for autonomy. Encourage a diversity of these factors, such as memories, perceptions, visions, expectations. The idea here is, although experience may be involuntary, we can create greater autonomy by providing for a diversity or wide range of possible experiences. And so in a connectivist course, we see access to or provision of many resources, many exercises, many different kinds of experiences, many different kinds of technology, many different media. And then finally, for this factor, we want to maximize the factors that strengthen autonomy, such as perspective, point of view, literacy, numeracy. And so in a connectivist course, we provide models or examples or exemplars or paradigms of these things, and we scaffold or encourage the development of these personal capacities, the development of worldviews, the development of point of view, of literacy, of numeracy. And so these are things that we value and try to bring out. Okay, so that's the first aspect of autonomy. If we look at the factors affecting empowerment, which was the second of the four factors of autonomy, again, roughly and loosely, we can break these down into physical, social, structural, and resources. And there are different aspects of empowerment related to each of these four. Physical empowerment relates to not just things like the capacity for perception, mobility, support, but also laws, rules, regulations that may govern behavior, all the way through to static environments, static displays. The social factors affecting empowerment, the social factors affecting a person's capacity to act may include peer pressure, threats, or sanctions on what we might say is the negative side, or complexity in which the nature of the phenomenon makes it impossible for a person to know how to act, through to factors that draw out effective or engaged action. Structurally, we can think of things that prevent effective action. Online, we think of design barriers, traps, locks, loops. You imagine yourself in a city on a bus that just keeps going around and around in a circle and won't let you off. That would be a structural factor affecting your autonomy. The predictability of the environment is important, knowing what's going to happen again. In design literature, you see a lot of the time that you want an online environment to be predictable so that you know what the controls do, that when you hit a certain button, it does the same thing every time and doesn't do something randomly. And when it does do the same thing every time, that is a factor that improves or increases your power or your capacity to act in that system. And then with resources, the accessibility of resources, the range and depth of resources increase your capacity to act. The language and the presentation of these resources may impair your capacity to act. And again, I've drawn a continuum. It's rough, it's loose. We'd want to characterize this in a lot more detail. But the things that are more static provide less autonomy. The things that are more like traps, barriers, threats, sanctions, these are things that limit your capacity to act. And then there are factors that can improve or increase your capacity to act. In a connectivist course, these principles are instantiated as follows. So first of all, we want to maximize. I don't know why it did that. Oh, PowerPoint crashed. That's why it did that. Yes, I know it quit unexpectedly. That just happened to me. Wow. Well, that's different. Okay, let's get ourselves to the right slide here. I'm close. Here we go. There, how's that for a quick recovery? So we want to maximize the factors providing greater physical flexibility. And in a connectivist course, we do this by supporting the learner's own physical environment. We do not bring them to us to fit within the constraints of our environment. Rather, our environment supports the learners working in their own individual environments. People can write in their own blogs, or they can use Google Docs or Word or PowerPoint or whatever they want. We do not impose an environment. In this way, the connectivist course is a distributed course, which makes sense when you think of a connectivist course as being designed in the model of a network. The second condition, please don't crash again, to minimize social pressures and to encourage people to participate in their own way. Now, I could have probably constructed an entire talk on this single slide, and many people have studied this in great detail. The short form of this is that in a connectivist course, we support multiple environments rather than a single central forum. And what that does is it minimizes the capacity of a person to use leverage within that central forum in order to modify behavior. Peer pressure exists only if the peers are in the same environment. But if you can distribute the environments, you lessen the impact of negative social behaviors. Third, we minimize structural constraints and reduce forced detours, loops, and other sorts of requirements. And that's just a fancy way of saying connectivist courses are not designed. We do not employ an overall theory of learning design to a connectivist course. We do not attempt to take a person step by step through a set of materials. That route is available for them if they wish, but it's not required of them. And then finally, fourth, we maximize the range, depth, and openness of the resources. And I have a whole other slide presentation about open educational resources and their role in a connectivist course. The idea here is that a connectivist course will use open resources and an open resource environment, allowing the participants to make use of these resources, reshape these resources, and to contribute and share resources of their own, so that the resources themselves become a medium of communication, a medium of exchange among the students, something that would not be possible in a traditional locked down environment where resources cannot be copied, cannot be shared, or cannot be modified. We now look at the third factor, factors affecting engagement. And as you can see, there's a blooming of different factors. Notice the night flower, never mind. And I've identified, and again, this is a rough and ready taxonomy of 5 major factors affecting engagement. Everything from selection, association, expression, method, and range. And in these factors, we see things, and just running through them, in selection. This is selection of resources, selection of people with whom to associate, selection of channels which to watch. With association itself, the capacity to create groups, looking at the directionality of communication from individual to individual, the scope of association that's possible, whether it's simply within the group or whether association is possible outside the course as well. The expression that is used, languages, for example. One language in a course provides for less autonomy. Support for many languages provides for more. But not just language, also the media that are used, the word use or the vocabulary. Courses that use a very narrow, specified vocabulary provide for less autonomy, but where there's wider scope for greater vocabulary, there is greater autonomy. In method, in a course where there is a single pedagogy, no matter how good that pedagogy, whether it's behaviorist or constructivist, problem-based, action theory, etc., the fewer the pedagogy, the more specific the pedagogy, the less autonomy there is for participants in the course. But a course that supports many pedagogies, many operating principles, many choices, offers more autonomy. And similarly, with the range of possible results or effects. In an environment where you can only create a few effects, there is obviously less autonomy. In a connectivist course, I've taken these factors and boiled them down to 3 simple principles. And again, that's very arbitrary, but you get a sense or a flavor of this. These principles are not intended to be like laws of connectivism. They're intended to be rough expressions of a much more complex underlying environment. So the first principle is to maximize the range of and flexibility of associations and groupings. We do not view a connectivist course as one single group, one single class. In fact, we don't even sharply identify whether somebody is in the class or outside the class. It really doesn't matter. They can be right on that line. They can come, they can go, we don't care. And within the class, people can form groups. We encourage them to form groups if they wish. They are not required to form groups, and groups or group structures are not imposed on them. So in a connectivist course, we don't require groups, but we allow groups. We don't enforce groups, but we support groups. And in that way, we create greater autonomy. Similarly, with respect to engagement as regarding the form of communication, our connectivist courses encourage, and as much as we can, support multiple languages and diverse communication environments. It was very interesting for us. The first connectivist course we ran, we had not 1, not 2, but 3 separate Spanish language groups. One for Spain, one for Latin America, and then another one which we don't know where it came from. And they participated in different environments. 2 of the Spanish language groups participated in Second Life, and a third participated in an online discussion group. In a connectivist course, we encourage and try to use multiple modalities, not just text, not just flat presentation, but images, audio, simulation, and the rest. Even a talk like this, I'm recording, I've got the slides, I've got the images, I'm recording the audio, and will, after this presentation, make these multiple media available for all of you, so that you are not constrained to listen only to this talk and hope that you retain some of it, but you are able to go back and look at the presentation and listen to the audio recording. That's the connectivist way of doing it. And then third, in a connectivist course, we expect different reasons for engagement. People have their own purposes, their own motivations. And so in a connectivist course, we expect multiple outcomes, not a single outcome, and varying mechanisms to produce those outcomes. In a typical university course, the outcome is get some knowledge, pass the test. In a connectivist course, Maybe getting the knowledge is the outcome. Maybe making contacts is the outcome. Maybe becoming familiar with the vocabulary is an outcome. We don't know. We don't presume to know. So we support mechanisms of interaction that allow for the engagement of people with multiple variable goals and objectives, which I cast here in slogan form as supporting cooperation over collaboration. And again, there's a whole other talk on the distinction between cooperation and collaboration. And we support various and varying pedagogies in order to support these multiple objectives. We have a course right now called CITE2011. And each week we have a different person coming to present in that course. And it's been very interesting because each person who presents in that course has a different understanding of what it is to teach and what it is and what sort of pedagogy that they want to use. And we've had 6 people so far in that course, and we've had 6 different pedagogies employed in that course. It's been very interesting. Finally, the factors affecting the effect. There are 2 major dimensions to the effect. First of all is the impact that an action or a behavior has, and that impact can be divided into the audience, how many people are impacted, and the force of the impact or the efficacy, or what is the weight or the strength of that impact. But we also want to look at the nature of the impact, which I described very loosely under the heading of improvement. And we can all think of a wide range of improvements that a behavior could cause. I've categorized them under 4 major headings, very arbitrarily. Internal, external, associative, and social. Internal could break down into knowing more, feeling better, which is pretty fast and loose, but it's the personal improvements that you can make through an educational process. External impacts reflects one's position with regard to the external world, and these are improvements in employment conditions or improvements in wealth. Associative impacts, the promotion of one's rights, the promotion of social justice, things that create better cohesion among community. And then social impacts, public goods, community improvement. So autonomy requires both impact but also improvement. Simply making an impact without it being an improvement in your own life or the life of people around you is not autonomy. And attempting to improve yourself or the life of people around you without actually making any difference is also not an expression of autonomy. So you need both of those. In a connectivist course, these are reflected as follows. While on the one hand, emphasizing the personal, understanding that learning is personal, understanding the need for diversity and autonomy in the individual learner, nonetheless, attempt to create a structure that maximizes range and impact, creates the most impact on the greatest number of people. And consequently, the connectionist pedagogy supports massive participation, not limited, 8 people, 10 people, whatever, but massive participation. As I mentioned, our first course attracted 2,200 people. The course that we have now has attracted over 2,000 people. Those are the sorts of numbers that we talk about, and we attempt to maximize the impact on each member of that course. But also recognizing and supporting the potential for improvements, both social and personal, in these participants. And this is an important factor. Taking a course and being successful in this course might not be a case of you learning more, or you becoming more satisfied, or even you making more money. You may be satisfying a greater social good by taking the course. We have people who do this. We have people who take our course in order to participate in the course, not to learn things, but to help other people who are participating in the course. It would make no sense in a closed traditional environment. But when we offered the first connectivist course in 2008, we offered the second course in 2009, and in that course, we had a large number of people who returned from the first course. Not because they didn't think they got it, but because they came in and then they started to teach the course. And because it's an open, autonomous environment, that was not only allowed, it was encouraged. And so we had an environment where people were getting a good effect by creating positive social good through their participation in the course. And this is a principle that holds more widely. The expectation of participation in the course is not simply that you will grow and learn and become more expert, but that you will help the community of which you are a part grow and learn and become more expert. So there are multiple dimensions of effect that are supported by supporting the autonomy of participants in the course. You might be asking, how do you measure the effect? How do you understand or comprehend the effect? As I mentioned at the outset, we can't simply test people. Did you learn Paris is the capital of France? Yes, you did. Oh, good, you pass. Rather, we have to look at much more complex indicators. To characterize this very quickly and loosely, we recognize the formation of neural networks. We recognize the creation of expertise in an individual participating in the course by their performance, by their wider impact and effect on the overall social network. This is a complex, multi-part, many-variable kind of analysis. Right now, there are some very simple systems doing analysis of network impacts. There's a site out there called Clout, which just counts the number of people who subscribe to you. It's a very coarsely grained, ham-fisted kind of measure. But you begin to see how a person is learning in a community by a person's engagement and participation in that community. And to the extent that they contribute to and help in the support of a healthy community, a healthy network, we say that they are more expert. And there are different ways of measuring this. I've had discussions with some mathematician friends of mine about identifying central clusters and proximity to the center of these clusters, etc. But again, this is a whole other talk. So finally, to wrap up, because my time is limited, sadly, how do we see these factors of autonomy expressed or represented in connectivist course? Because so far I've given you a whole pile of theory, but do we actually see this in practice? Do we actually see these different dimensions of autonomy in real-life connectivist courses? Well, now we have 3 years of experience, not just ourselves, but a various number of other people. We've begun to see a number of connectivist courses take form. Indeed, 2011 might well be called the year of the MOOC. We offered our Connectivism and Connective Knowledge course, CITE2011. And again, we attracted hundreds of people to it. Again, we had people come and teach in the course. This is a video here by one of the course participants describing how to learn or be successful in a MOOC. This is Dave Cormier's quick recounting orient, declare, network, cluster, and focus as a recommendation of a process or mechanism. It's not my process or mechanism, but again, it's the idea that there are many ways to success in a network, and this is one of them. George Siemens and some people at Athabasca University offered a course in learning analytics, and the focus here was how to measure participation and behavior in a learning environment, and especially in a massive open online course. And you can see some of the results from that course, and this is a set of connections. I think it's mostly Twitter communications. I think that's the only dimension that they examined between participants in the course. And as you can see, what happens in a connectivist course, and this is something that we've seen over and over and over again, we can create very deep, richly structured networks of interactions between the participants, and we can see and even measure how large that participation was in that network. And not surprisingly, the people who were teaching the course were the best at it. That's kind of what we would expect. Inge de Woord in Belgium offered what she called Moby MOOC, and this was a course talking about the use of mobile technology in learning. I wanted to put this diagram up on this screen because each one of those red dots represents a participant in her course. She did this completely on her own without George Siemens or myself or anyone else. Got participants from around the world, English-speaking, Spanish-speaking, French-speaking, Dutch-speaking, and you can see people in India, Japan, Africa. So there's a great deal of diversity in this course. A really amazing course was Jim Groom's DS-106 course, or as I've titled this here, The Madness and Mayhem. DS stands for Digital Storytelling. And this was a massive open online course based out of his class at Mary Washington University, which encouraged the use of multiple media in storytelling. And it attracted participants, again, around the world. It spawned its own radio channel, DS-106 Radio, which has regular DJs from Japan, from the US, of course, from Canada and elsewhere, and has resulted in this proliferation of artistic endeavors, everything from videos to animations to alternative storylines and more. There's EduMOOC, a very large, well-publicized, although not that interactive course. But what was really interesting about EduMOOC was that while it was very traditional in its form and structure, it allowed for the creation of an underground presentation of EduMOOC. And so people like Jeff Lebo and others created Google Hangouts and used live stream to broadcast that. And so instead of the standard teacher presentations, which went on, they had their alternative underground presentations where they had conversation and interaction among the people who were in the course. There's the AI class, artificial intelligence class, which completely redefined Massive. It was launched by two professors out of Stanford University. By the time the initial sign-up had ended, they had more than 200,000 people registered. They're doing some things that we haven't done. They're doing things like automated quizzes and activities, which you pretty much have to do with 200,000 people. I'm reading now that that has dropped off, but that's expected. People come, they sample, they decide it's not for them, they move on. There's no in or out in a connectivist course. And then finally, of course, there's CITE2011, our course, where we have, again, about 2,000 people, give or take, and we're having different professors take part each time. So that's all the time that I have. I'd like to thank you for your participation. I've certainly appreciated the time and the ability to be able to present to you. And the next slide is supposed to be my URL, but as you can see, it's blank, and I've ended up, when I restarted, I think I restarted the wrong presentation. So let me just try to open this again. I know I restarted the wrong presentation, so that was kind of funny. So, please be the right one. 48, that looks, there we go. So, and as I mentioned before, you will be able to find the slides and the audio for this presentation, depending on my upload speeds in my hotel, hopefully later today, but if not, within a few days. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming to hear me speak.